tragedies all over the world. So apparently we do need that, but I'm sad to say that I do believe that we really need to wake up now when it comes to the situation on the planet, because we don't want it to be too late when politicians take full responsibility. We have a lack of time. And also when we talk about water in Stockholm, we do have an old wastewater network system, so we need to make huge investments to be able to take care of the water better and increase the capacity. Right now, when it's raining, heavy rains in Stockholm means that we have a risk of wastewater entering into our water bodies. And with climate change, it will rain much more. So we need to really do these investments, because that's also threatening the quality of the water.
I believe you, Andrea, you have said that the climate change is expected to intensify hydrologic extremes. And it's not, about droughts and extreme rain. I mean, they go together, which may seem strange. I mean, it's dry and then you get all the rain, and the rain doesn't go into the groundwater because the ground is too dry, or.
What is really impressive is the acceleration that we see in the consequences, is the rapidity of the change. And if you look at indicators of whether social or economic, whether you're talking about the concentration of greenhouse gases, you're talking about the population, you're talking about the fish the fish nursery areas exploitation, etc. All of them have a behavior which is called the hockey stick diagram, which in Sweden should be one of the national sports. In fact, is hockey. That is something since we started to measure somewhat regularly, early 18th century, 1710, for instance, the longest time series of daily precipitation started in 1710 in the observatory of Galileo. Wow. In fact, in Padua. But what you see is that a Holocene-like flat thing for about 200 and some years, and in 1950 they start going up like a hockey stick. It's the pace of change that is scary.
Yes.
And that this hasn't sunk into the collective consciousness. And this, the scientists and what the politicians should bear in mind very clearly. So it's the pace of change that worries.
That is very scary indeed. You have also said that it seems like development thinking and environment thinking are stacked against each other. It's like buildings versus ecosystems.
Well, that is a quote from Partha Dasgupta, major environmental economist, professor in Cambridge, and he said, yes, development economics, which is a paradigm in how we work, etc., is stacked against nature. Environmental economics instead is something which you consider, as we were commenting before, the wealth of nations has to include the natural capital. And the downside was that you couldn't put the price tag in the past. Now we know how to. It's clear that economic indicator, flat economic indicator of riches, do not give the sense of the wealth and the poverty of nations. Because what happens is that left alone without, and that's ideological, I have to say, unless the intervention of the states, of entities, sovereign entities, if you leave the system alone, you will find that the distribution of wealth anywhere is self-organized into a curve in which 80% of the wealth is in the hands of the 20% of the richest persons. Well, it's almost inevitable. Those curves, called Zipf's law of wealth, it's in the US, in Bangladesh, wherever you are, with different total amount, but with the same behavior. It's a self-organized behavior. We shouldn't let the system go like that. We have to control it. I am very much fond of state control on those measures, in fact.
Andrea, please sit. You can shake hands where you're sitting down so you don't mess your microphone.
No, but I cannot avoid to stand.
What can you do? He's Italian. Thank you, Åsa.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
I have to stand. For the microphone.
Now, what I was trying to talk about earlier, Venice and 1966, the flooding. How did that affect your family?
Well, it affected me personally, and I come from a family of water engineers. My grandfather was, and my friend, as you can.
They're good friends.
very dear friend of mine and a distinguished colleague. Sorry.
He understood. Yes, constant distractions. Now, let's go to Venice, 1966.
So I come from a whole family of hydraulic engineers, so it was kind of a daily discussion. But in Venice, everybody teaches hydraulics, because the sense of participation to the fate in such a fragile environment, in fact, since centuries, the citizen, the layperson, has been participating to the debate. Whether or not the Serenissima Repubblica paid any attention is debatable. I've been insulted by a few historians because I have a feeling they couldn't care less. They looked like they wanted to show attention. And the culture of the time was not... But what happened in 1966 is that the water raised. It was a major flood. You heard about Florence, for instance, the disaster done to the cultural heritage. And their masterpieces have been destroyed, and it took like 20 years to kind of recover after that. In Venice, what happened? Nobody died, but the water went almost 2 meters above mean sea level. It is 100% of the city was flooded. And what was most important is that the storm surge that generated it stayed up for 15 hours above 1.5 meters when 100% of the city is flooded, in about 20 hours. So you used to be thinking of those cycles of ups and downs, of let the moon sweep the lagoon, a famous oceanographer said. Well, he went up and didn't go down. He went beyond the level in which even the elementary plumbing, the plugs, the electric plugs, were old studs, and all the deposits of oil, of whatever fuel you had in town. So when finally the waters receded, the misery left behind was really touching, and the sense that probably we wouldn't know whether Venice would survive. And it happened in the past that quite a few capitals have been abandoned, in fact, in historic times. Was that the case? Will Venice survive in the future? That's something which I very much like to call your attention, but that's a different story.
Someone even told you when you brought this up, said that, well, I sympathize, but nobody cares if Venice disappears, which is...
It happened to me.
Yeah.
It happened to be at a conference, a distinguished professor, when I was saying that, will Venice survive? What if Venice dies? And the guy said, who cares? Well, I hope you do care. Because Venice it's a symbol of our responsibilities, actually, one of the most important symbols of our responsibility, and a template on how, in fact, you have to act opposing climate change whenever the built environment cannot be relocated. But it's a different story. Venice is always in my mind.
Of course. Yeah. Professor of Hydrology and Hydrogeology at the Stockholm University. So happy you could join us despite being slightly incapacitated. This was due to heavy rain making the floor wet and you slipped.
Yeah, water again.
So glad you could join us. But you two, you go way back. How did it start?
Well, the thing that comes to mind, well, we go really way back, since I was a PhD student, and of course the thing I remember most is, again, Venice, and the summer school in environmental dynamics that you have created and kept going for years and years. So that was so inspiring for me to be in that summer school, first as a student, then coming back as assistant, still a student, and eventually as a lecturer. Fantastic. And then we have met on various other science occasions, of course.
And you also wrote a support letter for Andreas' nomination. So tell us now, and just, you know, let the praise just come. Why is he especially worthy as the laureate this year?
Well, we've heard a lot of things already, but Andrea is a world leader in water science. And what is the most impressive and part, he is not like, the tendency is to look at some process, some component, and focus on that and make great contributions. But Andrea has gone through various aspects of water and water science and linked them, and done so from how the water shapes the landscape, how it carries with it pollutants, sediments, pathogens, and then how that links to biodiversity, to our health, human health, and animal health. So linking all these different facets of water and water science, and doing it with a rigorous scientific framework and approach, that is fantastic, and that is exactly what we need.
Mm. You both have studied the spreading of diseases through water. So tell us about that. You were telling us a little bit earlier, but...
Yeah,
as I mentioned, the origin is serendipity. It is, we saw that one of the great features that I'm very grateful of to my EPFL, the Swiss university, is that I could do field work, I could do laboratory work, I put up a wet lab, and do a mathematical description, which is where we started out. We were born in fluid mechanics, which is a rational way of describing mathematically how nature works. And an important colleague said that unless the language of nature is mathematics, actually. Mm-hmm. So the federating thing that we have, unless we frame it mathematically, we don't feel it's completely understood. So, and we soon realized that the same mathematical tools that apply to other things, neutral theory, biodiversity, great tradition of science of all kinds, would apply to disease. Then we started collecting data, and that got into something completely different, because, for instance, where do disease go? Mm. Where people go? And then it was known since Middle Ages, and because, isolating cities to prevent against contagia had been ongoing since 1,000 years or whatever. Again, what is different now is the pace. Because look at the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past, the Black Plague took 20 years to propagate on a global scale. Now it took one flight from Wuhan to Toronto to spread it worldwide.
It was so much faster.
So much faster. It's the pace of events, even in the way you see it. So you started watching and realizing that nowadays, I have a story which I think it's very interesting. You can track people's mobility with unprecedented accuracy through the GPS you have in your cell phone, for good or for bad. Now, upsides and downsides. On one side, for instance, the fact that you can track mobility over a grand scale is a big data problem which can handle very nice. You see where people goes, and if you impede, in fact, in the early COVID-19 outbreak, there was a complete lockdown in Italy. And from the phones, you knew that people wouldn't stay at home. My country is adorable, but not very ruly when it comes to obeying conditions, etc. On the other hand, if you go to the south of the world, and you see that the ownership of a cell phone is not socially biased, but having safe water at home, it is socially biased, is something we cannot turn our head on the other side. So let's talk about this new normal, let's talk about modernity, and let's take what's good about modernity, but let's reject firmly what is not good about modernity.
Gia, what about your perspective on the spreading of diseases?
Well, I have looked at it at some other diseases than you have, and in particular those that are prevalent in the Nordic and Arctic region. And this is a region, you talked about the pace of change, this is a region where the pace of change is faster than in other parts of the world. And of course, going from water to health is a quite straightforward connection. Everyone, I think, can understand that. And we wanted to look at how this the changes in climate and water conditions would affect a range of different diseases that we see here in the north and the Arctic. I went about it in a bit different way. You looked at the actual spreading of the pathogens. The way we have looked at it is how various types of changes